At Thanksgiving, I made the turkey, brought the drinks, and paid half the bill. Just before dinner, my mom smirked and said, "Remember, you're only a guest here." My dad laughed, my sister rolled her eyes. I just smiled, took off my apron, and promised they'd never eat on my dime again. This isn't just a story about a bad Thanksgiving. It's about the moment I finally shattered the illusion that my family cared about anything more than my wallet. It's about the bitter taste of being called a visitor at a table I'd spent years and thousands of dollars helping to keep afloat, and what happened when I finally decided to stop playing their game. For years, I'd told myself this Thanksgiving would be different. Every holiday, I'd pack my car to the brim with groceries, drinks, and desserts, then drive 2 hours to my parents' house, clinging to this desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this time they'd see me as more than a smiling ATM. This year, I even went above and beyond. I volunteered to handle the turkey, prep a bunch of sides, and split the catering cost with my mom, all just to lighten their load. I convinced myself this was my chance to finally feel included, to truly repair things with my family. But deep down, I knew better. That morning, I arrived early, lugging heavy bags into the kitchen. My sister was already sprawled on the couch, glued to her phone, barely acknowledging me. My mom gave me a distracted nod as I started unloading, her eyes fixed on the turkey she was basting. "Put the wine in the fridge," she said, without even looking up. My dad was outside, already in full supervisor mode, barking orders at my brother-in-law as they set up the table. By noon, my feet were aching. I'd been chopping vegetables, mashing potatoes, and practically running a marathon between the kitchen and dining room for hours. No one really thanked me, but I rationalized it, telling myself they were just busy. When the caterer arrived, I stepped outside and quietly paid my half of the bill. It was more than I wanted to spend, but I truly believed it was worth it to keep the peace. The table looked beautiful, the food smelled incredible, and despite the exhaustion, I felt a flicker of pride. I even put on one of my nicest button-downs before dinner. This had to be the year, right? The year they'd finally notice how much I contributed. But then it happened. The moment that changed everything. As we were about to sit down, my mom turned to me with this little smirk. You know, the kind she uses right before she says something pointed. "Don't forget," she announced loudly, her gaze locking onto mine, "you're just a visitor here." My dad actually chuckled, like she'd just delivered the funniest punchline. My sister rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. For a second, a cold dread washed over me. I thought maybe I'd misheard her. But no. She said it again, softer this time, almost under her breath, but just loud enough for me to catch it. "Visitor." It hit me like a physical punch to the gut. I froze, the carving knife still in my hand, my apron tied around my waist, feeling every single eye in the room on me. A visitor? After everything I'd done today? After everything I'd been doing for years? I forced a smile, slow and calm, because if I didn't, I knew I would snap. My hands, surprisingly steady, untied my apron. I hung it neatly over the back of a chair. No one said a word. Maybe they thought I was just taking a seat. But inside, something fundamentally shifted. That was the precise moment I decided things were going to change. I sat through dinner quietly, nodding at conversations, giving short replies, even laughing at a joke or two. But my mind was a million miles away. I couldn't escape that word, visitor, ringing in my ears. Every time my dad poured himself another drink, every time my mom bragged about the cranberry sauce as if she'd made it herself, every time my sister complained about her rent, I just kept smiling. But that smile wasn't for them. It was for me. Because I already knew what I was going to do. I didn't have all the details worked out yet, but one thing was crystal clear. This was the very last Thanksgiving I'd ever spend feeling like an outsider at my own family's table. The last time they'd eat off my dime and laugh about it. When dessert was served, I excused myself early, claiming I was tired from the long drive. Mom gave me a half-hearted wave. Dad mumbled something about locking up on my way out. They didn't notice the way I paused in the hallway, looking back at that perfectly set table, everyone eating and talking like nothing had happened. They didn't see the slow, knowing smile I gave, this time truly for me, before I walked out the door. And that's when the planning began. The drive home that night felt endless. The radio was on, but the music was just noise. All I could hear were my mom's words, her voice echoing in my head. My dad's chuckle, my sister's dismissive eye roll. Just a visitor. The more I replayed it, the more I understood. This wasn't just a throwaway comment. This was how they genuinely saw me. I'd been showing up, paying, cooking, making an effort for years. And for all that, I got a condescending smirk and an insult. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the hurt had curdled into a cold, hard anger. My house, the house I bought on my own at 25, felt like a sanctuary, a different planet compared to my parents' place. Quiet, peaceful, entirely mine. I set my keys on the counter and just stood there in the kitchen, breathing slowly until the knot in my chest began to loosen. Then I poured myself a glass of water, sat down at the table, and opened the family group chat. The messages were still pouring in, pictures of the pie, my dad cracking another family tradition joke, and then my sister's selfie with the turkey. "I did this," her caption read. That one stung more than it should have. She hadn't lifted a single finger all day. Not a dish washed, not a single trip to the store. And yet, she was soaking up all the praise from relatives. I locked my phone and left it face down. That was the moment I truly understood just how profoundly one-sided things had been for years. The days after Thanksgiving were tense. Not with my family, they were acting like everything was perfectly fine, but with me. I stopped texting back immediately. When Mom called that weekend to ask if I could send money for some extra costs from Thanksgiving, I simply told her I'd look at my budget and quickly hung up. That's when their true colors started to show. Suddenly, I was the ungrateful one. Mom sent a long, dramatic message in the group chat about how family isn't about money. It's about showing up, conveniently ignoring that I had, in fact, shown up and paid. Dad chimed in with his usual sarcasm. "Guess Luke's too busy now that he's a big shot with a house and a fancy job." My sister sent one of those passive-aggressive, okay, texts that screamed she was talking about me to all her friends. I wanted to retort, to defend myself, but I didn't. I stayed quiet. I let them talk. And it didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, my mom called again. This time, she didn't even bother with small talk. "So, your sister's car needs repairs," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "The mechanic says it'll be about $1,200. She's a bit tight on cash right now, so I told her you'd help." I nearly dropped my mug. "Excuse me," I managed. "It's just a loan," Mom quickly added, as if that would make it better. "You make good money, and she's been stressed enough as it is. You know, she's had a hard year." I took a long, steadying breath. "Mom," I said, my voice calm, "I'm not giving her money for a car repair. She's had 3 jobs in the past year and quit all of them because she didn't like the vibe. That's not my responsibility." Mom went silent for a second, then let out a short, hollow laugh. The same kind of laugh Dad had given at Thanksgiving. "You've changed, Luke. You used to be so generous." "I'm still generous," I corrected her, "just not with people who treat me like I'm only good for my wallet." That ended the call. 3 days later, Dad called. I let it go to voicemail, but his message was tight, irritated. "Your sister is crying, Luke. She feels like you don't care about this family anymore. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this attitude stops now. We don't turn our backs on family when they need us." I didn't call back. Instead, my mind started replaying all the other times they'd pulled this routine. Every Christmas, every birthday, every cookout. The time I covered my brother-in-law's bachelor party dinner because Dad forgot his wallet. The time Mom hinted I should pay for new patio furniture because you use it too when you visit. The time my sister threw a fit because I wouldn't help her move for the 3rd time in 2 years. I thought back to the Thanksgiving table, to that word, visitor, and a chilling realization dawned on me. They'd only ever invited me to the table because I brought something to it. By mid-December, the pressure ramped up. My sister started calling me directly, something she almost never does. "Look," she said one evening, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If you can just cover the repair, I'll pay you back in January or February at the latest. You know, I can't get to work without my car. You don't have a job, I reminded her, flatly. She went quiet, then her tone snapped, completely changing. Fine, she hissed. Be selfish. But don't come crying when mom and dad stop inviting you to things. You can't just cut yourself off and expect everything to be normal. That last part hit me like a dare. Christmas Eve arrived, and a part of me almost didn't go. But another part, a defiant part, wanted to see just how far this would go. I brought a small box of chocolates as my contribution and nothing else. When Mom opened the door, I swear her smile flickered, just for a second, when she saw I wasn't carrying my usual bags of groceries. Inside, the atmosphere felt different, heavy. My dad barely grunted a hello before turning back to the game on TV. My sister was already on the couch, loudly recounting her awful luck with the car, how some people just don't step up anymore. A few relatives glanced at me knowingly. I stayed quiet. When dinner was served, Mom made a pointed effort to thank my sister for helping so much with the prep this year. My sister just smirked and said, well, someone had to. That one almost made me laugh out loud. The table looked like it had been thrown together last minute, and I knew for a fact my sister hadn't been anywhere near the kitchen. But I stayed quiet. I ate my food, complimented the ham, and made small talk. Inside, though, I was meticulously cataloging every word, every look, every laugh at my expense. Because if Thanksgiving had been the wake-up call, Christmas Eve was the stark, undeniable confirmation. On the drive home that night, I didn't feel angry anymore. Not really. I felt clear. They weren't going to change. And that meant I had to. But before I made any final decisions, I had one more test in mind: New Year's dinner. If they pushed me one more time, if they tried to guilt me, humiliate me, or treat me like the visitor they claimed I was, then I'd know exactly what to do. And trust me, I was ready. New Year's dinner at my parents' house had always been the biggest deal of the season, even bigger than Christmas, honestly. Every relative within a 50-mile radius showed up, and my mom treated it like her personal red carpet event. She insisted we all dress nicely, put out the fancy plates, and there was usually a long, pompous speech from my dad about family unity. I almost skipped it this year. Every fiber of my being wanted to stay home, open a bottle of wine, and watch the fireworks from my porch. But I knew if I didn't show up, they'd use my absence as proof that I was the problem. So, I decided to go. But this time, I brought nothing. No groceries, no wine, no dessert. Just me. When I arrived, Mom opened the door and actually frowned for a split second before catching herself. Oh, she said, feigning surprise. You came. Happy New Year, I replied, smiling politely. Inside, the house was a whirlwind of activity. My sister was already there, dressed to the nines, loudly regaling everyone with tales of her rough few weeks. She caught sight of me, smiled sweetly, and said, just loud enough for the nearby relatives to hear, wow, Luke actually made it. I just hung up my coat and joined the others. Dinner started late, as it always does, and by then, I could feel something brewing. My mom and sister kept whispering in the kitchen. My dad was topping off his drink before anyone else had even finished their first. The tension in the air felt different, heavier. We all sat down at the table, and just like every year, my dad stood up to give his speech. Family is everything, he started, looking around the table. We've had our ups and downs, but at the end of the day, we show up for each other. That's what matters. It sounded harmless enough until he added, some of us have forgotten that lately. The room went silent. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just kept my face neutral. Dad sat back down, and Mom took over. Speaking of showing up, she said lightly, your sister has had a really hard time with her car situation. But we have good news. We've decided to all pitch in to help her out. That's when it clicked. I knew what was about to happen. Mom smiled sweetly and set an envelope in the center of the table. Everyone's contributing something. We thought it would be nice to make it a group effort. The envelope was already half full of cash. And then she looked directly at me. Luke, we put you down for $500. I already told the mechanic we'd have it to him next week. I felt my jaw tighten. You what? It's only fair, Dad said, his tone sharp now. You make the most money out of everyone here. It's time you pulled your weight. I glanced around the table. A few of my cousins were suddenly fascinated by their plates. My sister just sat there, a smug smirk plastered on her face. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. "You didn't ask me," I said slowly, my voice low. Mom waved a hand dismissively, like it was nothing. "Luke, stop being dramatic. It's family. We all help each other." "No," I said, my voice flat, firm. "You all decided this without me. And then told the mechanic I'd pay. That's not helping. That's being volunteered without consent." Dad's chair scraped back as he leaned forward. "You're making a scene. Just put the money in and let's enjoy dinner." I stared at him for a long moment, then at my mom, then at my sister. No one said a word. Finally, I stood up. "No." Mom's face turned beet red. "Luke, sit down." I said no. My voice was calm now, quieter than I expected. "I'm not giving you a dime. Not tonight. Not ever again." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "Don't you dare talk to your mother like that in this house." "This house?" I actually laughed. It wasn't a funny laugh. It was the kind you let out when you finally understand something too late. "You mean the house I helped pay for when you were behind on the mortgage last year? The house I've been helping keep afloat with every holiday, every bill, every time you forget your wallet." That got some heads turning, but Mom just glared. "If you want to act like an outsider, Luke, then you can leave. Visitors don't get to disrespect the hosts." And there it was again. Visitor. Something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and set it on the table. Then, calmly, deliberately, I took out a single $20 bill and slid it across the table toward the half-full envelope. "There's my contribution," I said evenly. "Buy her some windshield wiper fluid." The silence that followed was deafening. My sister's mouth fell open. My dad looked like he might explode. Mom just stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. I put my wallet back in my pocket, pushed my chair in, and said, "Enjoy your dinner." Then I walked out. No one followed me. On the drive home, my hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline. For the first time in years, I hadn't given in. But by the time I got home, the texts were already waiting for me. "Mom, you embarrassed us in front of the whole family." "Dad, you're selfish. Don't bother coming back if this is how you're going to act." "Sister, hope you're happy. My car is still broken." I didn't reply. I sat on my couch in the dark, staring at my phone, and that's when it truly sank in. This wasn't just about one dinner. This was about years of being treated like a bank, a handyman, a background character in their lives. And if they thought this was me cutting myself off, they hadn't seen anything yet. Because I wasn't just going to stop paying. I was going to make damn sure they felt every single consequence of the way they had treated me. The first few days after New Year's felt like a hangover without the drinking. Everything was heavy, my chest, my head, even the air in my house. I kept replaying that dinner scene over and over, like a broken record. My mom's voice, cold and dismissive, calling me a visitor. My dad's angry glare, my sister's triumphant smirk, the way absolutely no one, not a single person, spoke up for me. I have expected someone to call, to try and smooth things over. Not to apologize. I wasn't naive enough for that, but at least to clear the air. But the calls never came. What I got instead were more texts. "Mom, your behavior was unacceptable. We're not sure how to move forward with you until you apologize." "Dad, you made your mother cry. You should be ashamed." "Sister, hope you enjoyed your little tantrum. Everyone was talking about it after you left. Good job." Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach tightened. After 3 days, I stopped checking my notifications altogether. But it was the silence from everyone else that stung the most. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I'd driven across town for, helped move furniture for, lent money to, babysat kids for. Not one message. Not one, "Hey, are you okay?" And that's when it really sank in. They were choosing a side, and it definitely wasn't mine. That first weekend, I barely left the house. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching shows I didn't care about just to drown out my thoughts. I ordered takeout instead of cooking. The kitchen still faintly smelled of roasted turkey from Thanksgiving, a scent that now just made me angry. On Sunday night, I got an email from my mom. It was a long one. She meticulously listed every favor they'd ever done for me, letting me live at home after college for 6 months, letting me borrow Dad's old car once, paying for a dentist bill when I was a teenager. Then she wrote that they were disappointed in the person I'd become and that maybe I needed to take some time to reflect on what family really means. I didn't reply. I just sat there, staring at the email, and felt a wave of something new wash over me. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was something sharper, colder, clarity. The next week at work was rough. I was distracted, short with my coworkers, zoning out during meetings. My boss even pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. Yeah, I lied, just tired. But I wasn't tired. I was drained. I started noticing how much of my energy had been tied up in trying to earn my family's approval. All the extra hours I'd worked to afford nice gifts at Christmas. The countless trips to the store before big dinners. The endless effort I'd put into being helpful, reliable, the good son. And for what? So they could laugh about me behind my back? So they could call me a visitor in the house I'd helped them keep? One night, about 2 weeks after the dinner, I got a text from my cousin Mark. He rarely reached out, so I hesitated before opening it. Hey man, it read. Just wanted to say I thought what happened at New Year's was messed up. I didn't want to say anything in front of everyone, but you didn't deserve that. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than anger. Relief, maybe. Gratitude. I thanked him for saying something, told him it meant a lot. And that's when he dropped a bombshell that made my stomach twist. Mark, you know they've been talking about cutting you out of the family group chat, right? They said if you're going to act like this, you don't need to be included. I just stared at the screen. It was such a small thing, a group chat, but it felt like the final nail in the coffin. Not because I cared about the chat itself, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. They were writing me off completely. And that's when I stopped waiting for them to fix anything. The following weekend, I cleaned my house from top to bottom. It felt like shedding a layer of skin. I took down the framed family photo in the hallway, the one from a vacation we took when I was 17, and tucked it into a drawer. I packed up the dishes Mom had given me as a housewarming gift and put them in a box in the garage. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't angry. It was deliberate. Step by step, I started cutting out anything that tethered me to their version of family. By February, I was in a better routine. I stopped checking the group chat entirely. When Mom called, I let it go to voicemail. Same for Dad. My sister eventually stopped trying to bait me with texts. I started cooking more, focusing on myself. I went to the gym a few times a week. I caught up with friends I hadn't seen in months. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for me, not for them. But deep down, I knew I wasn't done. Because as much as I was moving on, there was still one thing that gnawed at me, the mortgage help. I'd given them last year when they were behind on payments. It wasn't a gift, it was supposed to be a temporary loan. They promised they'd pay me back once Dad's bonus came through. That was 9 months ago. And now they were acting like I owed them something. I pulled out the old paperwork I'd saved, bank transfers, emails, texts, everything documenting the $8,000 I'd wired them to stop the foreclosure. I read through it carefully, highlighting every line where they promised repayment. And as I sat there with the papers spread across my dining room table, I realized something. I had leverage. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I didn't want to be petty for the sake of it. But if they were going to treat me like the villain, maybe it was time they saw what that actually looked like. As the weeks went by, my plans slowly started to take shape. Then came the message that solidified my decision. It was Mom, of course. Easter dinner is coming up. Everyone's bringing something. I put you down for ham and dessert. Also, your sister still needs help with the car. You can settle up with her then. Settle up like it was already decided. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I set my phone down, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Not a bitter smile this time, a knowing one. Because Easter was going to be different. And for once, I wasn't going to be the one left hurting when it was over. February bled into March, and I noticed something strange happening. I was starting to feel lighter. The tightness in my chest that had been there since Thanksgiving began to ease. The silence from my parents and sister wasn't bothering me as much anymore. In a weird way, It was a relief not to have my phone buzzing with their constant demands. At work, I threw myself into projects that had been sitting on the back burner. I started coming in early, volunteering for assignments no one wanted, and finishing them ahead of schedule. My boss noticed. By mid-March, I'd been asked to take the lead on a big client proposal. It meant long hours, but it also meant visibility. One Friday, after a particularly big presentation, my boss pulled me aside. "Luke, you've been killing it lately," he said. "There's a management role opening up next quarter, and I think you should apply." I tried to play it cool, but my heart was racing. A promotion would mean a significant pay raise, more responsibility, and frankly, more freedom. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and thought about how far I'd come in just a few months. I wasn't the same person who had stood there at Thanksgiving with an apron on, silently taking their insults. I was starting to feel like someone they wouldn't even recognize anymore. My personal life started to reflect that shift, too. I reached out to a few old friends I hadn't seen since college, people I'd drifted away from because I'd always been too busy putting my family first. We grabbed drinks, caught up, laughed about old times. It felt good to be around people who actually enjoyed my company for me, not for what I could bring or pay for. I started spending my weekends differently. Instead of driving to my parents' house to help fix whatever had mysteriously broken that week, I worked on my own home projects. I repainted my guest bedroom. I planted herbs in the kitchen window. For the first time, my house didn't just feel like where I lived, it felt like my space, my sanctuary. I could almost hear my dad's voice in my head mocking me for playing house, but for once, the thought didn't sting. It made me smile. Money stopped being a quiet point of anxiety. Without the constant drain of paying for family events, covering emergencies, or buying half the groceries for every holiday, I watched my savings account grow. I started putting more into investments, something I'd always wanted to do but never felt like I had enough breathing room for. By the time March ended, I had saved nearly $4,000 in just 3 months, almost half of what I'd given them for the mortgage the year before. Seeing that number in my account gave me a kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. But the real turning point came in early April. I was going through some files in my home office when I found the manila folder labeled House Docs Mom and Dad. Inside was every receipt, every transfer confirmation, every text message screenshot from the mortgage bailout. I'd kept it organized at first just to make sure they paid me back. Now I looked at it with new eyes. I wasn't just holding proof of what I'd given them. I was holding proof of how much power they had over me at the time. That folder represented every sleepless night I'd spent worrying they might lose the house. Every time I'd bailed them out without hesitation, even when it meant putting my own plans on hold, and they had turned around and called me a visitor. I sat there staring at that folder for a long time. Then I took out my laptop and started drafting a simple, polite letter requesting repayment in full. No threats, no anger, just facts and dates and amounts. I didn't send it, not yet. But just having it saved on my desktop felt like reclaiming something, like putting my hands back on the steering wheel. Around that time, I got an invitation to a friend's birthday dinner. I almost said no. The old me would have worried about running into questions about my family, but then I decided to go. The night was one of the best I'd had in months. We laughed, told stories, shared memories, and when someone inevitably asked, "So, how's your family?" I surprised myself by not dodging the question. "They're complicated," I said. "Honestly, we're not talking right now." And to my surprise, no one judged me. No one said, "But they're family," or "You should make up with them." Instead, one friend nodded and said, "Sometimes you have to do what's right for your own peace." It felt like permission to keep going. Then Easter rolled around. I'd been waiting for it, half expecting a message from my mom the week before demanding to know what I was bringing. Sure enough, 5 days before Easter, I got a group text. "Mom, Luke, don't forget to pick up the ham and dessert for Sunday. We'll see you at 4 o'clock. I stared at the message, feeling that old mix of anger and sadness start to bubble up. Then I took a deep breath, and for the first time in my life, I didn't reply. Sunday came and went. I stayed home, made myself a nice brunch, and went for a long walk. When I got back, my phone had 14 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. The next day, I got another email from Mom. This one was shorter than the last. You hurt this family, Luke. Everyone was asking where you were. Your sister cried all night. We don't know what happened to you. I didn't reply because I knew exactly what had happened to me. I had finally stopped trying to prove myself to people who didn't want to see me. By May, the promotion at work came through. I signed the offer letter with a grin on my face, then treated myself to a weekend getaway. Just me, a cabin by the lake, and no family drama. I sat on the deck that Saturday morning, coffee in hand, watching the water, and thought about how much had changed in less than 6 months. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And that's when the idea for what I needed to do next became crystal clear. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about setting the record straight. Because if they thought I was just going to fade into the background quietly, they were in for a very rude awakening. After that weekend at the lake, I came home feeling sharper than I had in months. Clearer, like I'd been walking around with foggy glasses and someone finally wiped them clean. It wasn't just about cutting them off anymore. It was about taking back control of the narrative. I opened my laptop, pulled up the repayment letter I'd drafted, and read through it again. It was simple and professional, outlining the $8,000 I had given them, the dates of the transfers, and their clear promise to pay me back once Dad's bonus came through. This time, instead of saving it as a draft, I printed it, signed it, and tucked it into an envelope. But I didn't mail it. Not yet. Because I knew that just sending the letter would immediately get me labeled as spiteful or greedy. I needed more than just a letter. I needed proof that this wasn't about money, it was about respect. One night, I went through my phone and scrolled back years in the family group chat, saving every single message where they had asked me for money or help and where I'd said yes. Gas money for my sister, new tires for Dad's truck, catering deposits, plane tickets for relatives, even the random Venmo requests for just a little help that had added up over the years. When I tallied everything, the total was staggering. Over 5 years, I had spent nearly $14,000 on family emergencies and shared costs. No wonder my savings had always felt like they were just barely staying afloat. Seeing that number gave me a kind of calm resolve. This wasn't me being dramatic. This was me finally putting a stop to a cycle. Around this time, I also started working more closely with my company's finance department because of my new role. I learned a lot about budgeting, projections, and how to track money. And it got me thinking about my own finances in a way I never had before. I created a detailed spreadsheet of every single expense tied to my family. Not just the $14,000 over 5 years, but every holiday cost, every dinner bill, every random favor. I categorized everything. When I was done, I had a clear picture of just how much I had been subsidizing them. And it wasn't pretty, but it was empowering because now I had something I'd never had before. Documentation. April turned into May, and the calls from my family slowed down. Not because they were letting go, but because they'd moved on to the silent treatment phase. They were waiting for me to crawl back and apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But instead of chasing them, I doubled down on my own life. I joined a local volunteer group, spent weekends helping at a community garden, and made friends outside of work for the first time in years. I started taking photos again, a hobby I'd given up ages ago because I'd been too busy keeping up with family obligations. Each time I did something for myself, I felt stronger, more grounded, and slowly, the bitterness started to fade, replaced with strategy. Then came the phone call that sealed my decision. It was early June, and I was on my lunch break when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Luke," she said without preamble, "we need you to cover the deposit for your cousin's wedding venue. They're trying to lock in the date and can't afford the deposit right now. We'll pay you back when we can." I almost laughed out loud. "Mom," I said carefully, "do you realize you just asked me to pay for a wedding I'm not even sure I'll be invited to?" "You will be invited," she said quickly. "But that's not the point. This is about helping the family. Your cousin is in a tough spot." "So was I said flatly. "When I gave you $8,000 last year. I'm still waiting on that repayment, by the way." There was a long pause. "That was a gift," Mom said, finally, her tone turning cold. "No," I said, feeling that clarity again. "I have the texts, Mom. You promised you'd pay me back. Don't rewrite history just because it's convenient now. She huffed. Luke, if you're going to hold every little thing over our heads, maybe it's better if you don't come to the wedding at all. Maybe it is, I said calmly. But I'll be sending you something. Not money. Just a reminder of what I've already done for this family. And before she could reply, I hung up. That night, I got to work. I finalized the repayment letter, attached a copy of the spreadsheet showing every contribution I'd made over the years, and included screenshots of the mortgage texts. It wasn't angry or emotional. It was professional. Then, I scheduled it to be sent by certified mail so they'd have to sign for it. But I didn't stop there. I also quietly withdrew from the joint Costco membership I'd been paying for, canceled the recurring subscriptions that were still in my name but being used at their house, and removed my card from the family streaming accounts. Small things, maybe, but symbolic. Because this time when they sat down to watch TV or go shopping, they'd feel my absence in more ways than one. By mid-June, I felt completely different. I wasn't anxious anymore. I wasn't waiting for their next move. I was making mine. Every step I took, every little thing I untangled myself from, gave me more power. And then came the final piece of the puzzle. I discovered that the mortgage company had overcharged them on property taxes last year, something that technically meant they were owed a partial refund. The refund would go to whoever was listed as contributing to that payment. And guess whose name was on the transfer record? Mine. It was small, a few hundred, but it was enough to make me grin as I filed the paperwork. Because this time, the check wouldn't be going to my parents' mailbox. It would be going to mine. When I sat back and looked at everything I'd set up, the repayment request, the financial boundaries, the removal of my name from their conveniences, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Prepared. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was building something. And I knew deep down that the next time they tried to corner me, I'd be ready. Not just to defend myself, but to turn the entire situation around. By the time July rolled around, the letter I'd sent had been delivered. I knew because I got the signed receipt back in the mail. 2 days after that, my mom called me for the first time in weeks. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened to it, her voice was icy. Luke, we got your letter. I can't believe you'd do something so formal with your own parents. This isn't how family handles things. You should be ashamed of yourself. I replayed it twice just to let it sink in. There was no mention of the money, no acknowledgement of the promises they'd made, no apology. Just guilt-tripping and anger that I dared to put things in writing. That voicemail was the final confirmation that I'd been right to do what I did. Because now, there was no pretending this was just a misunderstanding. A week later, I got an envelope in the mail from my parents. I opened it cautiously, half expecting a check. It wasn't. Inside was a handwritten letter from my dad, dripping with condescension. He wrote that he and Mom had talked it over and decided they wouldn't be paying me back because family doesn't keep score. He accused me of trying to punish them and ended the letter with, "If you want to be part of this family, you'll stop acting like a creditor and start acting like a son." I sat at my kitchen table and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. And that's when I knew exactly what I was going to do next. First, I scanned the letter and added it to my growing folder of documentation. Then, I called a friend of mine who worked in collections, not to send them after my parents, but to ask a simple question: how do I make sure a repayment agreement is legally enforceable? She explained how promissory notes worked, how I could create one retroactively if I had evidence of the loan and their agreement to pay me back, which I did. By the end of that week, I had a legally binding document drafted, signed by a notary, and ready to file in small claims court if it came to that. But I wasn't rushing. This wasn't about getting the money back as fast as possible. This was about timing. That timing came sooner than I expected. In early August, my sister posted on social media about finally getting a new car. Not a used one. A brand new SUV with all the bells and whistles. The caption read, "Finally treated myself. Couldn't have done it without Mom and Dad." The comments were full of congratulations, and my parents even chimed in, "So proud of you." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled. Because now I had undeniable proof that they had thousands of dollars to help her, but not a penny to repay me. I waited until the following Friday, then sent them an email with the updated promissory note attached. Subject line: formal notice of repayment. I kept it short and professional. Mom, Dad, per our previous communications and attached documentation, I am formally requesting repayment of the $8,000 loan transferred on date. Please note that the promissory note has been notarized and will be filed with the court if full payment is not received by date, 30 days out. Thank you, Luke. No anger, no emotion, just facts. The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up. Mom called twice. Dad texted, "This is outrageous. You're really taking us to court over family." I didn't reply. Instead, I screenshotted their messages and added them to the folder. 2 weeks went by and I heard nothing more. Then, just as the 30-day deadline was approaching, I got a cashier's check in the mail for the full amount, plus interest. No note, no apology, just money. And that's when I realized my plan had worked better than I could have hoped. Because now they weren't just angry, they were embarrassed. Embarrassed enough to quietly pay me back rather than risk me showing up in court with a stack of evidence about how they'd handled money. But I wasn't finished yet. The next step wasn't about money. It was about reputation. I waited until Thanksgiving planning started to roll around. Mom sent the usual group text about the menu in early October. And then I sent one message back. "Thanks for including me. I won't be attending this year. I'll be hosting my own dinner at my house instead." Then I texted my cousin Mark, the only person who had reached out to support me months ago, and invited him and his family over for my dinner instead. When he agreed, I posted about it on social media. A simple photo of my dining room table with the caption, "Hosting Thanksgiving this year. Can't wait to share it with the people who've always had my back." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. The ripple effect was instant. A few hours later, my sister posted a passive-aggressive story about people who think they're too good for family traditions. I ignored it. Instead, I focused on making my Thanksgiving perfect. I ordered the best turkey I could find, made all my favorite sides, and even splurged on a few fancy desserts. When the day came, my house was full of laughter and warm conversation. No tension, no guilt trips, no passive-aggressive comments. It was the first holiday in years where I actually enjoyed myself. And I made sure to take plenty of pictures. Not to rub it in, just to remind myself what it felt like to finally have peace. The best part? 2 days later, I got a text from one of my aunts. Someone I hadn't heard from since New Year's. "Luke, your mom was furious when she heard you had your own dinner. But honestly, good for you. It's about time someone stopped letting them run the show." I didn't reply right away. I just sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was freedom. Thanksgiving at my place turned out to be even better than I expected. My cousin Mark brought a fantastic bottle of wine. His kids helped me set the table, and we all sat around telling stories late into the night. It felt easy. No one competing for attention, no backhanded comments, no one trying to control the room. When everyone left, I stood in my quiet kitchen looking at the dishes stacked neatly on the counter and smiled. It was the first holiday I'd ever hosted, and it felt truly mine. I posted a single photo to my social media the next morning, just the table, lit softly by the last of the candles, with empty plates and wine glasses scattered around. The caption was simple, "Best Thanksgiving I've had in years." That's all it took. By noon, my phone started blowing up again. First came the group chat. "Mom, so this is what you've been planning? Excluding your family and broadcasting it for everyone to see." "Dad, real classy move, Luke. Hope you're proud of yourself." "Sister, you ruined Thanksgiving for Mom. She cried all night." I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, and for the first time ever, I didn't feel anxious reading their messages. Instead, I felt calm. Because there it was, the proof that they were finally feeling what I'd felt for years. Not anger, not guilt, just the sting of being left out. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I forwarded the entire conversation to my cousin Mark, just so someone else would know what was happening. He called me immediately, laughing. "They're losing it," he said. "My mom said everyone at the table was whispering about you last night, wondering why you weren't there." Apparently, your sister made some speech about how you've changed and how you don't care about family anymore. I rolled my eyes, but I was smiling. Let them think what they want. I'm done trying to prove anything. Mark hesitated for a moment. You know, he said slowly, more people are on your side than you think. Everyone's just too scared to say it. That made me pause. Because it meant my family wasn't just mad, they were losing control of the narrative. A few days later, I got a call from my dad. This time, I picked up. Luke, he said without preamble. You've made your point. You've embarrassed this family enough. If you think we're going to keep crawling back just because you're holding money over our heads, Dad, I interrupted calmly. You already paid me back. This was never about the money. This was about respect, about not being treated like a visitor in a family I've bent over backwards to support. He went quiet on the other end of the line. You can't just cut off your family, he said finally, his voice quieter now. I didn't cut you off, I said. You made it clear I wasn't welcome unless I played by your rules. I just stopped playing. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Look, he said after a moment. Your mother wants to talk. She thinks maybe we should start fresh. I almost laughed. Start fresh after everything? Yes, he said, almost pleading now. But we're not going to beg. If you want to come to Christmas, you can. If not, that's your choice. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, I won't be coming this year, but I hope you all enjoy your dinner. And then I hung up. Christmas came and went without a single call or text. I spent it with friends this time, people who actually wanted me there. We exchanged gifts, played board games, stayed up until midnight. It was one of the best holidays I'd had in years. Then, a week into January, my sister texted me out of nowhere. You win. Mom and Dad are done hosting holidays. They said it's too stressful now. Hope you're happy. I stared at the message for a moment, then felt a strange wave of satisfaction. Because that was it. For years, I had been the one holding those gatherings together, buying half the food, paying for the drinks, setting things up, cleaning afterward. And now that I wasn't there to prop it all up, the whole thing had crumbled. It wasn't my victory exactly, but it was my freedom. Spring rolled around, and life only got better. I got another raise at work after leading my first big project to completion. I started dating again, something I hadn't done seriously in years because I'd always been too drained from family drama. I even booked a trip overseas for the summer, something I'd been putting off forever. And every time I walked through my house, I felt proud because this was the life I'd built without them. Then one afternoon in April, I ran into my sister at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me and, honestly, a little tired. So, she said cautiously, you're really done, huh? Done with what? I asked. With us? With the family? I smiled, but it wasn't cold. No, I'm just done being the only one holding it together. She looked down at her cart, then back at me. They miss you, you know. I nodded. Good. Maybe they'll think about why. And with that, I grabbed my bag of groceries and walked out. I didn't hear from my parents again for months. But when Thanksgiving rolled around that year, something unexpected happened. I got a card in the mail. It was simple, just a plain white card with a short message inside. Luke, we miss you. We were wrong. We'd like to start over. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it twice, then set it on the counter. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry or hurt or obligated. I just felt at peace. Because I knew that whether I decided to forgive them or not, I finally had the power to choose. And this time I smiled, not for them, but for me. And that was the last time anyone ever called me a visitor. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more crazy Reddit tales, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. And hey, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would have done in this situation.